Lily Coyle, 12/8/20. Hi, so my name is Lily, and I'm going to be giving a presentation on the determination of gender, genes versus hormones. So both play a role and a distinct role, so we're going to be breaking down each of those. So sex chromosomes determine the genetic sex. So humans are usually born with 23 pairs of chromosomes. There are 22 autosomes, and there is one pair of sex chromosomes, and we'll be focusing on that. So females usually are born with XX, and males are usually born with XY. So when when females undergo meiosis, or males undergo meiosis to create sperm or eggs, they each have a 50-50 chance of giving one of the two chromosomes. So because women contain two X chromosomes, each of their eggs will always contain one X chromosome. And then in the males have XY chromosomes. So when they undergo meiosis to create sperm cells, each sperm has a 50-50% chance of getting either an X or a Y. So the thing about the Y chromosome is it contains the sex-determining region of the Y chromosome, the SRY gene, and the SRY gene is what ultimately determines the sex, and we'll talk about that more in a little bit. But as we can see here, we have a female and a male, and the two options are if a female gives the X and the male gives the X, and you'll have a female offspring. If the female gives an X and the male gives a Y, you end up with a male offspring. And something important to note is the presence of the X chromosome is necessary for life because it also contains genes that are, programmed for general things that the cell needs to survive. So the X chromosome is always present and necessary. Okay, so the SRY gene, I said before, that determines sex or genetic sex, but how does it do that? So the SRY gene alone determines gonad formation. At this point, there are absolutely no hormones involved. It is just the SRY gene and the proteins it ends up encoding for. So before we dive into that, here is the bipotential embryo. Bipotential means that the embryo is indistinguishable from a male or female, and this is up until the 7th week. So this embryo is probably around 7 weeks. And important structures to note is the bipotential gonad here, the Müllerian duct, this purple part here, and the Wolffian duct, which is that yellow kind of ridged duct. So basically, the bipotential gonad has the inner medulla, this purple part, and the outer cortex, the pink part. And ultimately, the bipotential gland will become the gonads. So, in a male off on the left here, we know the SRY gene is present because of the Y chromosome. So, if the SRY gene is present, this gene will code for testes determining factor. And this is a protein that will activate other genes. And these other genes are ultimately what encode for the gonadal medulla, so the medulla portion, to become the testes. So the cortex regresses and the medulla alone becomes the testes. So that is the male version of how the gonad becomes the testes. Or sorry, how the gland becomes the testes. So then over here to the right, we go through the version of a female, and in this case, the SRY gene is absent. So without the SRY gene, we're not going through these steps required to produce testes, so the kind of, default would be to produce ovaries. So in the absence of the absence of the Y gene, that means there's absence of the testes determining factor, and this allows activity of other female-specific genes to become active. So at this point, with these active female-specific genes, which is a very complex process, the gonadal cortex becomes the ovaries, and the gonadal medulla regresses. So each portion of this gland became either the ovaries or the testes. And again, at this point, which is very interesting, there is absolutely no hormonal input at this point. We are just at genetics here. This is just based on this one gene, the SRY gene. Okay, so now let's talk about hormones. So now that we have the testes, which are the male gonad, the testes produce three major hormones. The first hormone it produces is the anti-Müllerian hormone. It's secreted by the Sertoli cells, and this hormone causes the Müllerian duct to regress. So this regresses, and now we're only left with the Wolffian duct. So now we have the androgen hormones secreted by the Leydig cells, and the androgen hormones are testosterone and dihydrotestosterone, DHT. So DHT is a derivative of testosterone, and it is catalyzed by 5-alpha reductase. So we'll talk more about that later. Testosterone is responsible for making the testes drop into the scrotum. And it's also responsible for formation of the internal sex organs. So testosterone now converts this Wolffian duct into the epididymis, the vas deferens, and the seminal vesicles, which are important for, carrying sperm down into the urethra. And then we have DHT, and DHT stimulates prostate growth and its external genitalia. This is what forms the external genitalia, the penis and the scrotum. So now we're seeing some hormone come into play, and each has their own distinct function. So now let's move on to the female. So with the female, again, the lack of hormones matters. So it's very interesting is kind of like the male pathway here. It's all about the presence of testosterone, the presence of DHT, all these hormones. And the female pathway is just the fact that they're not there. It allows other things to happen, which is very interesting. So for development, the ovaries don't produce any hormones significant for development of sex organs. I know you probably think I was going to talk about estrogen, but I'm not. It has absolutely no role here whatsoever. So female development is based on the absence of three hormones. So without anti-Müllerian hormone, the Müllerian ducts do not regress. They stay, and they become the internal sex organs, the upper vagina, the uterus, and the fallopian tubes. So without testosterone present, this causes the Wolffian duct to degenerate. So now we're just left with the Müllerian duct becoming the internal sex organs. And finally, there is no DHT present, which allows external female genitalia to form. So again, like the default is for the external female genitalia to form, like the labia, clitoris, and vaginal opening. So DHT kind of pushes forward the male external, and without this, the female is the default. And again, there are some female genes at play here, but they're very complex, and we're not going to go into it. But still, this is all just lack of hormones is how the female reproductive organs form. Okay, so now the more fun portion is talking about some abnormalities, and we can kind of, critically think about what the lack of certain things would cause. So the first thing we're going to talk about is Turner syndrome, which is females. And Turner syndrome affects females because they are missing one of the X chromosomes. Like you can see here, it's XO, which means they're missing the second X chromosome. So this causes atypical ovarian development, and this will eventually lead later in life to diminished estrogen production. So the ovaries aren't fully developed, and without estrogen, of course, the menstrual cycle and the reproductive cycle for the female is extremely altered, and it doesn't really function correctly. This, unfortunately, leads to infertility, usually. So the external genitalia are normal. Remember, the external genitalia are based simply on no DHT being present, so that's unaffected here. And what's interesting about Turner syndrome is it does impact the body in so many ways. There's a lot of physical characteristics that these women with this syndrome have, like downturning eyelids, their short stature, and usually they have heart, liver, and kidney issues as well. So the X chromosomes, it's really important for a female to have both present to make sure everything is functioning properly. So another abnormality is Klinefelter syndrome, which is an XXY. So we have an extra chromosome. And in this case, it is an extra X chromosome. So technically, this person is born male because the Y chromosome is present. But there's almost extra female characteristics coming through because the extra X chromosome. So with physical characteristics with this syndrome are small external genitalia, lack of body hair, and gynecomastia, which is like the breast development in males. So infertility is very common, just because there's issues with the testes have some problems developing to full fruition, which leads to low testosterone levels. But sperm can still be viable. Kind of depends on how the testes, like how severely they're having issues. But sometimes the sperm can be like harvested for IVF. So a common treatment for this syndrome is to give increased estrogen, increased testosterone, because with the XXY, the female characteristics come through too much, which kind of push the male characteristics back a little bit. So I just want to note here, as I mentioned before, that the X chromosome is necessary for survival, which is why we don't see a syndrome where it's just missing the X and only the Y. It's not possible because the X chromosome contains so many genes that are necessary for survival of the zygote. Okay, so the next syndrome is 5-alpha reductase deficiency. So if you can remember, 5-alpha reductase converts testosterone to DHT, so this does not happen. That means there's no DHT present. So if we think back, DHT was responsible for forming the external male sex organs. So without this, the male external genitalia and the prostate do not fully develop. So when these people are born, these babies are born, their genitalia are ambiguous. Either they will have a very small penis, or they might have very large clitoris. So it's hard to tell. So what's interesting is there is normal testes and Wolffian structures development, because remember, this is based on testosterone, which is still there, and the Y chromosome, which is still there. So sperm are usually viable. It just usually requires IVF. And typical male characteristics present on puberty, on the onset of puberty, because again, testosterone is present. So these people will develop a deepening voice, body hair, facial hair, things along that line. So the last thing we're going to talk about is partial androgen insensitivity syndrome. And this is caused by a defect of the AR gene on the X chromosome. And this is an X-linked recessive pattern. And basically this results in issues producing androgen receptors. This only really affects men because they have the XY, so any issue on the X chromosome, there's no like backup X chromosome to kind of compensate, which is why we see issues in men. So issues producing androgen receptors. So testosterone and DHT aren't super effective. And they don't respond to these androgens during their development as a fetus. So these insensitivities, the receptors, can range from partial to complete. So there is a wide range of what we see here. So they do have male internal sex organs. Just sometimes they're not fully developed. They are present. And there's a wide range of external physical characteristics from microphallus to clitoromegaly. So as you can see here with these different syndromes, there's so many things that can be abnormal, and there's different syndromes based on if it's a genetic problem or a hormonal problem. So okay, this ends my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.